Today on the 10-12 podcast, we were recapping Week 7 in the Big 12. The voice of BYU joins us to help us understand how the Cougars have started this season off 6-0. We recap every game on the schedule and a conversation about who is the RB1 in the Big 12 this season. Some surprising names, certainly compared to our list from the preseason. It's coming up on the 10-12.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like, you know, to check you have the tickets in your wallet first before you drive 2 hours to the big game. Seriously, you had one job. Now the closest you'll get to the 50-yard line is parking lot D. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Welcome to the 10-12, the podcast that covers all 16 teams in the Big 12 Conference. We are the flagship show of the 10-12 Network. Find every show on the network at 1012network.com. And of course, we are partners with Sports Social, Europe's biggest sports podcast network. I'm your host, Phillip Slavin. Thank you for joining us on this Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, whenever it is that you choose to listen this week. Wherever it is that you are listening, whether it's in podcast form, whether it's on YouTube, do us a favor. Leave us 5 stars if the rating is an option. Leave us a review. I would love to get some more. It really does help the show out, especially if you've been a long time or a consistent listener. And again, if you're watching on YouTube, like the video, leave us a comment. We will respond unless it's just hateful. And subscribe. It does help out. Man, what an interesting weekend in the Big 12. What an interesting weekend in the Big 12. And I'm very excited to talk about it. I watched a lot more Big 12 football this weekend than I had originally thought that I was going to. I didn't have a big plan to watch a lot of stuff. I had family in town. My parents were here. Went and played golf for work on Friday afternoon. Terrible thing. I am terrible at golf. I do not golf. But, you know, beautiful day on a Friday afternoon, not in the office, out on the green with your dad and some good people. And a little beverage or two. Not a bad office. Not a bad time at the office on a Friday afternoon. But we do have quite a bit to talk about today. And joining me as he does every week, he is the voice of the Raw Chalk podcast, the Kansas podcast, or the Kansas show here in the 10-12 Network. He is the man every Kansas State fan loves to hate. He is Andy Mitz.
I'm good to be back. Glad that I was able to get that 1 week break. Although I'm just as exhausted now as I was then. So, but that's all right. Look, my only gripe with this weekend was the fact that we had to watch like a Washington, Iowa or something in the early slot. Why couldn't we have put like Cincinnati, UCF or, I don't know, Arizona, BYU there so that we could have watched, wall to wall Big 12 all day?
We haven't had a morning game the last 2 weeks in a row. And we'll talk about week 8 here towards the end of the show as usual. And if you look at the schedule, there's one morning game. There's been a lot of Big 12 afternoon, nighttime, and late night. And I don't hate it. And we get our Friday, we've been getting Friday night games pretty consistently. I like that. And so I don't hate having the morning to get stuff done because it's kind of the reason I was able to watch way more this weekend than I expected to. Was because there was no morning game for me to have to feel like, I'm just going to have to skip this one. I didn't feel like I had to skip anything. Also joining us today, the Vibe Queen is out. She is at a concert tonight, so she is out jamming with her husband and some friends, I'm sure. So in her stead, very excited to have one half of the Big 12 After Dark show, our Twitter live space show here at the network. She is Brittany Rose at It's Brittany Rose on Twitter. Brittany, welcome back.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
I like how you're rocking the Kansas shirt. That's good. That's good.
I'm in denial.
So Brittany, I have to ask a question. How many Big 12 schools do you have a degree from?
How many do have I graduated from?
Yeah. Or how many have you attended? Let's do this. How many have you graduated from and how many have you attended?
One I've graduated from. The second one I'm in progress.
Okay.
I've attended 4.
Okay. Kansas is 1.
Yes.
Okay. Arizona State is 2.
Yes. Iowa State.
Okay. And Texas Tech?
Texas Tech.
Kansas,
See,
Iowa
that's
State,
why she's
Arizona
one of
State,
the, one half of Big 12 After Dark. She has a unique view on the Big 12 because she's been to, a quarter of the schools.
Wait, no,
and y'all know I get hate on it for it 24/7. But
yes,
you know
because you're not a loyal enough fan to any of the 4. You support all 4, which just makes you a monster in the eyes of also the fact that you're a woman who talks sports, which makes you, one of the worst creatures on the face of the earth, especially when you talk about it on social media when other men are talking. Brittany, I don't even know. Like, at some point you might learn your lesson. I doubt it, but
Please don't.
Look, I am not responsible for Brittany. We just, I thought it would be good to have a female voice on the show with Jamie out, and so Brittany was willing to come and
ever since my show's been in hiatus, like I've been like, you guys can see me chirping away on Twitter. Like I need an outlet to say something. I got opinions. So
don't we all? We all have opinions.
Well, we are glad to have you here talking opinions with us. Coming up in the second half hour, Greg Wrubell, the voice of BYU Athletics, is going to join us. We're going to recap the BYU game then. That's why it will be in the second half hour. We're going to talk quite a bit of BYU. We've got some other things to talk about with him as well. You know how this show goes. We try and keep it to an hour. We get through the first half hour to try and hit as many of the games. There was only 5 Big 12 games this weekend, so we've got some time to spend on these first 4. Let's go ahead and dive into it. Iowa State 28, West Virginia 16. West Virginia marched down the field on their opening drive with just 3 passes, got themselves a touchdown. Iowa State's defense then bowed up and held them to 9 points for the rest of the game. West Virginia had 150 yards on the ground. 67 of those came on that first drive. That was a very misleading first drive. Remember, what's the meme that Parker Fleming uses? It's the meme from American Psycho. It's like, oh, great. Now let's see the unscripted drives. And this is what happens. If you can force West Virginia to rely on Garrett Green's arm to win you games, especially to have to come back from a deficit, you're going to beat them. That's just kind of the way it's going to go. If they cannot successfully run the ball, stay ahead, keep the game close, you're going to be able to beat West Virginia. That is consistently what we have seen. Carson Hansen was a goal line stud for the Cyclones, scoring 3 of the 4 touchdowns with runs of 11, 3, and 2 yards. He ran one in from like 3 yards out, and I thought the way he was running it, he was running so hard and as fast as he could, I thought he might just run all the way out of the stadium. Because for me, I was like, I don't think he's going to slow down. He's just like, no, I'm never going to stop, never going to give you up. West Virginia had opportunities in this game, but a low possession game. The Mountaineers had 8 total possessions for the whole game, not very many. That included a missed field goal and 2 interceptions. It's just West Virginia with a big opportunity, a big night, dressed out in black. It was a cold night. And Iowa State was just, hands down the better team in Morgantown on Saturday.
Yeah, this is, I think the other thing that this game really showed me is the fact that John Haycock still is probably one of the best defensive coordinators in all of college football. That was just absolutely fantastic the way that he was able to really shut down West Virginia after that first quarter. West Virginia got a field goal in the second quarter, and then, they only got 6 points at the end of the game when the game was basically done. So the fact that they were able to, because West Virginia, like you said, was gashing them very early. Like it looked like, oh, this is going to be a game where West Virginia, they're going to get their run going. And the issues that Iowa State's had with injuries are really going to kind of come to a head here, and you're going to see the running game really get its own. And then they didn't do it after that. So Iowa State, I think, I forget who it was, but one of the national people was talking about how Iowa State is completely underrated. Like most people don't even know that this is actually a good Iowa State team. So I'm looking forward to kind of what Iowa State's able to do the rest of the year now that I don't have to worry about the possibility of my team coming head to head with them, for anything substantial. So it's a little weird being in the kind of area again where I don't have to necessarily, like, I can just enjoy the storylines in the Big 12, and Iowa State I think has to be one of those.
Yeah, no. There have definitely been seasons where Iowa State has been worse at the beginning of the year, and there's been more hype surrounding them than being undefeated currently. And I don't know if part of that just comes from they've been consistently decent now for multiple years, that it's expected, or at least a little more expected, as opposed to going from bottom of the Big 12 to all of a sudden being decent was such a shock. But I had a good feeling about Iowa State this week, which is odd. I usually always pick West Virginia to win games in which nobody picks West Virginia to win most games. I'm an avid trust the climb truster, but I just had a feeling. Everybody was picking West Virginia for this game, and I just had a feeling because of that, usually it's the other way around, that Iowa State was going to win. And I really believe that this is the year that Iowa State wins 10 games, or in Iowa State fashion, comes really close to it and then chokes their last chance away.
On your point of, and Andy, I agree. I believe it was, I think it was the CBS show that mentioned Iowa State's kind of under the radar. And I think there are three things responsible for that. One is, as we talked about, the Big 12 is not really getting love this season. They are not, from a metric standpoint, none of the teams are considered top 10 teams, right? And so when people talk about the Big 12, it's this wild and crazy and fun conference, this old Big 12. Look at this thing. Remember, the Big 12 is a chaotic conference where anything can happen as the new Big 12 doesn't play defense. It is the line being used by people who don't really watch the Big 12 all that much. So number one, you're not getting that much attention on the Big 12 conference. Number two, because the teams that were expected to be good are already getting dinged, the conference is getting less appreciation. While Utah is down with 2 losses, Oklahoma State's 0-3 in conference play, Kansas State blown out in Provo. Because the teams who are undefeated are Iowa State and BYU, and Kansas State is still ranked, there's the rankings continue to go up because they continue to win, but they're not getting the credit for it. Oh, and by the way, a lot of times when you got Iowa State hype early in a season, there's an OU win on the schedule. There's no OU in Texas this year. And because OU and Texas aren't here, we don't get the credit for beating a team. Doesn't matter if OU or Texas actually end up being good. We don't have the brand names to beat to get the eyeballs on the wins. So Iowa State's resume is better than I think people want to give it credit for. BYU's has got one of the best resumes in the country. They're getting even less credit than Iowa State is. It is just a Big 12 problem we're continuing to deal with this season. And look, I'll say this. Root for your team, cheer for your team. Got it. As a Big 12 person who has to look at what is best for the Big 12, I don't care how you feel about Iowa State. I don't care how you feel about BYU. I don't care how you feel about any of the other teams sitting there atop with one loss in the conference standing, Arizona State, Kansas State, Texas Tech. We'll talk about this more coming up. But you should be rooting for them to win. We need to be rooting for BYU and Iowa State because these two teams continue to win. At some point, the credit is going to come, but it's going to require unnecessarily good seasons that are unfair. They're going to have to be better than they even are or appear to be because the Big 12 is just not going to get the credit this year that it and its teams deserve.
Yeah, what it really comes down to, I think, is that if you're going to have any shot at getting 2 teams in the playoff this year, you've got to have 2 undefeated teams in the conference championship. Or I should say two undefeated in conference teams. So like a BYU, Iowa State, or potentially like if Kansas State were to be they beat Iowa State the last week of the regular season and they play an undefeated BYU, like then potentially a Kansas State win there would be enough to get them in, and BYU would probably still get in because they've beaten Kansas State once. Like there are ways to do it, but you have to have these teams that have surprised and really, kind of come out of quote unquote nowhere to continue to surprise and to continue to play as well as they have. The other thing I will say, kind of Iowa State not getting the credit is, you talk about how chaotic this season has been already for the Big 12. And I mean, you've got 3 bigger stories in how good BYU is, how good Arizona State is, and how good Colorado's been. Colorado has a legitimate Heisman contender, and then you have an Arizona State team that is still only has 1 loss. And, you have of course, BYU that we've already talked about is undefeated. Like those are 3 huge stories that are completely unexpected, that are more of a shock factor or a wow factor. And Iowa State is like, yeah, I mean, we didn't expect them to be this good, but I mean, it's Matt Campbell and John Haycock. Like they usually have pretty good teams. They just happen to now play in a quote unquote down Big 12 because, hey, look at who else at the top.
Well, and how much I haven't looked at viewership numbers, but maybe one of you guys has. How much also do you think factors into the Big 12 not really getting as much attention as we think it should because of the night games? Are there people missing games that aren't watching the games, or that cut out of the game early and go to bed that don't see it? I mean, we all like late night football, but at a certain point when they're so late, I mean, even I fall asleep at a certain point if it's not my team. I don't care that much to stay up till 1 a.m. So do we think that so much of the late night scheduling has also caused a decrease in viewership and paying attention as well?
I mean, I don't think fewer people are watching late night than normally do. I haven't looked at the TV numbers either. I'm not going to make the opinion of that. It is disappointing Colorado Kansas State wasn't earlier, so it could have gotten more eyeballs on it, being a close game. Now it's a close game because Kansas State's entire secondary is in the ER, and Travis Hunter got knocked out. But like I don't know that the TV time thing and the lack of it 11 a.m. games is having some sort of impact. Like there's plenty of opportunity for people to watch Big 12 games. I think it's just a lot of different factors right now, and it's not helping. The chaos story doesn't help as much. You don't get to be the fun, chaotic conference when all of college football is a bit fun and chaotic.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if like the SEC stealing the Big 12's thing again, like the SEC's being chaotic because of all these wild and crazy upsets. So that's been the story. Or Alabama almost losing to South Carolina. And so some of the headlines for the potential headlines for the Big 12 are getting stolen by Vanderbilt. Army and Navy both being ranked for the top AP top 25 for the first time since the 60s. Like this is a season of chaos. There's not we've got a lot of we have no great teams. Maybe Texas is a great team, but like there might just be one, and then everybody else is a big melting pot of mix and mess. And so there's all these big name teams that are getting a lot of mess. And so you're getting more attention pulled away from what's happening in the Big 12 this season. The Big 12 is just not the headlines. It's not had Colorado beat Kansas State, we'd be having a different conversation right now because it's Colorado. But Kansas State doing what it was supposed to do and going on the road in a late night game and beating Colorado isn't going to get the recognition. Iowa State going on the road in a late night, in an evening game and beating West Virginia, like it's just not West Virginia's. They're not the talk right now, and so until we get a game with some magnitude in the Big 12. BYU and Kansas and Iowa State don't play each other this season. So until we get Farmageddon, it's the last week of the regular season. We kind of need to, we don't have some marquee games to put on the schedule that are going to get people talking. And the other problem is if somebody does upset Iowa State, it's not going to be like, oh, look at this giant upset. It's going to be like, well, we didn't think Iowa State was that good to begin with. So there we go. Like that's the Big 12 is not going to get the credit it deserves this season.
With Uber Reserve, good things come to those who plan ahead. Family vacay? Reserve your ride as soon as you book your flights. To all the planners, now you can reserve your Uber ride up to 90 days in advance. See Uber app for details.
Okay, Arizona State 27, Utah 19. Dream season continued for the Sun Devils. Killian Dillingham disappeared into a student mosh pit on the field after the win. Not sure if he has come out yet. If anybody has set eyes on Kenny Dillingham, Coach Dillingham, let us know, because I think he still might be in that mosh pit if it's still out there. Fans rushed the field, and deservedly so when you knock off a ranked Utah team and pass the Vegas preseason win total of 4.5 in Week 7. Bravo, Arizona State fans. Forks up. Cam Scatabo continues an absolutely incredible season. We're going to talk running backs more in a minute, but I want to go ahead and throw these stats out. He is first in the Big 12 in rushing grade by PFF, first in FBS in getting a first down on a third down rushing attempt. Yes, let that process for a second. Second in FBS in rushing yards on third downs, third in FBS in all-purpose yards, fifth in FBS in rushing yards and rushing yards per game, and a two-time Big 12 Offensive Player of the Week. Cam Scatabo is legit. And on one of the conversations we had on the Picks episode on Thursday was like, he's been great, but Utah's defense, yes, they limited him in the first half. In the second half, he went off and had two huge runs for Arizona State. An absolute fantastic game for Cam Scatabo, who's just like, we're going to have a running back conversation here in a minute. Just all those stats need to be out there because he's part of this conversation. As for Utah, the expectation was Cam Rising returning would be great for the Utes. That was not a healthy Cam. Glove on his injured hand, a bum right ankle. He looked like a seventh-year quarterback who's had a lot of injuries in his career. That's what he looked like. If you're a seventh-year quarterback, there's probably a reason you're still in college football. Alan Bowman. Maybe it was a first game back situation. In theory, he should get better as he gets healthier each week, and the schedule is very favorable for Utah. TCU, Houston, and another week off. But I'm going to have to be sold on Utah moving forward as far in regards to them being some sort of Big 12 contender. At this point, I'm going to need to see something from them to convince me that's the case, because beat up Cam Rising was not great. I don't care that Utah outgained Arizona State. Arizona State's got Team of Destiny energy right now. You throw 3 picks, awesome.
Yeah, Utah has 2 losses now. They're 2 games behind a group of 3 teams that, to be honest, it's hard. Like, you look at their schedule and it's hard to find more than one team that they automatically are just like, you're like, hey, that very easily could be a loss. And so I was looking through the rest of the schedule for the rest of the year, and it's like, man, this really is shaping up well for those top contenders to stay top contenders. But like you said, Cam Rising, the whole reason that Utah was going to be was the hands down pick by a lot of people was because that defense was elite, and we've now seen multiple instances of really good runners actually taking full advantage of that, which means I'm not quite as sold on their defense being as elite as a lot of people thought it was, and Cam Rising was going to have to power that offense to score enough points. Until he is back. And I don't know that he's going to be back, just given the amount of injuries and where they are. Like, ankle injuries or foot injuries are difficult. And then hand injuries are also difficult to get back to full strength. So, until we see, consistent performances from him, I don't think that Utah is anywhere near as good as people thought they were, mainly because of injuries.
As a Utah hater, I will say I picked them to go to the championship game. I had them winning the entire season, going undefeated. But I will say what I've said on Twitter. They keep pulling our quarterback's hurt, blah, 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 blah. And yeah, you know what? Whatever. But last year, I think literally every single quarterback on every team in the Big 12 was hurt. They were on second string. Somebody was out because of gambling. That everybody was missing their quarterback, and nobody complained as much as Utah. Nobody used it as their just definitive excuse. Oh, my quarterback's out, so we're allowed to suck now. Okay, well, I understand a quarterback is a very, very important position, but I'm sorry if that is the only thing keeping your team in contention. Maybe you're not as good as you think you are. And maybe you do need a little bit of humbling, because I'm tired of seeing them say that they're going to run this conference. they're like dead in the middle of the rankings right now. And yes, I understand they could still win out, but I don't know. I think that they're just full of excuses. They keep saying that Cam Rising is essentially their savior and is going to come down and win everything. But you know what? I also don't think past performance necessarily predicts future success either. I mean, we've had quarterbacks that have done great one season, come back the next season, kind of sucked. We also have quarterbacks that we have thought were going to be Heisman contenders and have come into play, have been injured and come into play, and once again sucked. Jalen Daniels, sorry. I just don't think Utah is as good as they think they are, and I don't think they're gonna be.
I will say I have thoroughly enjoyed the super arrogant Utah fans from the summer getting humbled on Twitter with fun retweets and receipts being shown. So, and again, every fan base has those fans, but it is extremely great to see that. Look, I've even enjoyed when Kansas fans that decide that they are going to be complete jerks online get humbled when Kansas, falls down. As much as it pains me to have Kansas do that, jerks deserve to get shown up when it's warranted. So I'm all for it.
Well, and the worst part too is like some of these retweets and receipts that I pulled up in like the last week, people would be like, oh, like what a really bad, like old take from Utah. I'm like, look at the date. It's within the last week. Like these guys are still confident that they're going to win the conference, and they're still confident the Big 12 is trash and that they're better than us. And I'm like, how are you still saying that? It's obnoxious. I was a little obnoxious on Friday night on Twitter because I was losing my mind. Every single time they get close to the end zone and throw a pick, it was like Christmas morning for me. So you know what? To the 5 good Utah fans that I found on Twitter, I'm sorry. The rest of you, I'm very much enjoying this.
Kansas State 31, Colorado 28. This was an impressive win for Kansas State. This was. Kansas State was down 5 of their top 7 defensive backs at one point in the second half. They were down 3 of their top 5 for most of the second half. Like Kansas State defensive back room looks like Iowa State's linebacker room. Like the two of them can commiserate on the fact that they're basically throwing out anything and everything they can. They're just going to put a tackling dummy out there. It's not going to move, but it's at least a body of some sort on the field at a position of need.
Right. You just hope that somebody trips over it.
Yeah, maybe they'll not see it and they're like, whoop, gotcha.
There goes Avery Johnson.
I'm pretty sure Scott sent Chauncey out there to play defensive back while he was also there in Boulder for Kansas State. Chauncey with a really good game, 1 tackle, 1 pass up, broken up. So look, the fact that Kansas State was able to overcome all of that, and look, I know Colorado, Travis Hunter got hurt, and that is hugely impactful for Colorado. This was a messy game that Kansas State was able to tough out on the road and come back from. And that is big for Kansas State. Like Avery's playing hurt too, and I get it. Everyone's playing hurt. This Kansas State team is one where you needed to get them early. And I do think they are continuing to figure things out. Health is obviously an issue. Avery Johnson continues to figure things out. I think Colorado performed incredibly well. They got that lead late. But Kansas State has played very, very well in some tough spots here. They are not out of this race at all. They're not out of this running at all. I come away from this game impressed by both teams based off of everything that happened in this game, expectations for both teams, what's going on. I think Colorado has vastly exceeded expectations. I think Kansas State is, of the teams that were at the beginning of the season in the running for the conference that were all picked like top 4 or 5, Kansas State's the only one left. And it hasn't been pretty. They've had bad moments. Avery has looked like a first-year starter at times. But Kansas State feels like that team that has been able to kind of figure things out and work on things and get things right. They're still in this running, and I'm not counting them out.
Yeah, this is the first game that I've looked at what DJ Giddens did and said, "Oh my gosh, like that was DJ Giddens going beast mode." Right? Like Avery Johnson's had really good running games as well, kind of at the same time. You've been able to point to the offensive line. This is like the first time where you're just like, man, what the heck? Like that guy really can play the position really well. And it's like it's right on the heels of that Scadaboo, that performance from him as well. So it's just like you said, we're gonna talk about running backs later, but this was like as you like a lot of people are going to point to Travis Hunter being out and being like, hey, that discounts the win somewhat. But like you said, both teams were without very important players. But if Colorado is just Travis Hunter, then I'm not watching the same Colorado team as everyone else, because this is a team that has a legitimate quarterback. They have, they've had issues. Like the only issues that Colorado's had in the past have been their lines, and their lines have been fairly good this year. Like they're not like elite units that are gonna, be noticed by a lot of people, but they've been more than passable, and that's what you need. And so this is a Colorado team that has a ton of talent all over the place. They have guys that can step up. They just have one guy who is really, really good in Travis Hunter, who deserves to be in the Heisman consideration. I think not only because of, but definitely in part due to the fact that he plays both sides of the ball. But yeah, this was an impressive win in Boulder late in the day to kind of wrap up the weekend. And I mean, yeah, it was impressive. I think Kansas State is definitely still in that top tier of teams, and they're really the only team that was up there, like you said, that is still up there in that top tier of teams in the conference.
I agree in the fact that I think Colorado is doing very, very well this year. It's kind of interesting to me though, because at least in the media and even social media too, I mean, last year they were all over. People nonstop talked about them 24/7, all Deion Sanders, Colorado, blah, 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 blah. And they weren't good last year at all. And now all of a sudden you actually have a decent Colorado team. Maybe you guys have, but I haven't really heard as much about Colorado, haven't seen as much. They're not getting the hype that I think that they got last year, despite being significantly better. I think
part of that is because we saw what happened last year. They got a ton of hype and then fell off a cliff. They haven't done that this year yet, and I don't think that they will, just the way that they played. But I think a lot of people are still waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. I agree with that. And with Kansas State, as Phillip said, it hasn't been pretty. I don't know what to make of them because their games haven't been pretty. They're ranked, but I'm still worried. I don't know. I think they're good, but I don't think that they're on the same caliber as an Iowa State, a BYU. I think those teams would beat them if they had head-to-heads, which Iowa State does, but oh no, BYU did play Kansas State too, right? Didn't they absolutely destroy them? Yeah.
That's the one loss is BYU.
And it was by a lot.
Provo at night, folks. Provo at night.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was definitely a Provo at night game.
Turnovers.
Not trying to discount anything BYU did, but it was definitely a Provo at night game. But I will say, Kansas.
Well, we're just a Provo game because they did the same thing.
Arizona in the afternoon,
which we'll talk about.
But I think kind of to the point on Kansas State, this feels a lot to me like the Iowa State in 2020 team, where there was a lot of bounces that went their way to allow them to stay close and win games and win those close games. And I mean it's definitely not quite to the same degree, but just feels much like there are enough things to point to in Kansas State's games that you can, if you want to be worried about them, you can be worried about them legitimately. That being said, they're also a team that has been finding a way to win, with the exception of that one game against BYU. So you have to give them credit for that. You can kind of be hiding stuff away and saying, hey, I think this might be something that could be a problem. And then if it is a problem, then you have all the right to talk about it. But you can't discount what they've done so far just because, they haven't been as pretty as some of the other teams that are having really, really good years.
No, I agree with that a lot.
All right. let's hit this one quick. Cincinnati 19, UCF 13. Cincinnati continues to look like a competent football team. UCF less so. Brendan Sorsby, tough first half, much better second half. Cincinnati, the biggest compliment you get them. They look like a competent football team that plays tough and plays well. And UCF is not remotely what we expected UCF to be this year, at least not me. And this is two teams that UCF's going in the wrong direction. Cincinnati looks like they're going to make a bowl game. We'll talk about them in a minute. If we want to consider them a contender, I don't really, but nice win for Cincinnati, and UCF season is.
Phillip, my only comment's going to be, when are you going to apologize to Scott Satterfield?
I'm not.
No, look, I mean,
he wins a Big 12. Look, did they win 10 games? Serve me my credit.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a Cincinnati team that is, I think, perfectly competent, and they've run up against a bunch of teams that have a glaring flaw. And UCF is a team that honestly probably has more than one glaring flaw. In fact, the main thing that UCF had going for them was that they were going to have a running game that was heads and tails above everyone else this year, that was going to power them to wins, and it hasn't been. It hasn't come even close. And so this is a team that can't score. This is a team that is allowing other teams to score much more often than they should. And UCF has fallen off a cliff. Cincinnati is your typical middle of the road Big 12 team that I think has been fortunate in scheduling so far. But we'll see if they can keep it up.
UCF to me is always the team that I consistently pick if I think like there's going to be some crazy random upset that doesn't deserve to happen. UCF is going to get it. It's going to be some wild game they're going to win that they have no business winning. Otherwise, I think they're whatever this year. Cincinnati, God knows I love to pick on Cincinnati, but I think they're decent this year, but not, once again, not on the caliber of Iowa State and BYU. Now, on the other hand, their quarterback, super good. He was impressive in his game versus Tech. He looked like a pro quarterback, at least in my opinion. So I don't know. I think it's on the up for Cincinnati. I think that as long as they keep this up, that they could improve in the Big 12 over the next few years.
All right. So here's the question I want to pose you two before we get to the second half of the show. Who is running back one in the Big 12? Because when we entered this season, we talked a lot about RJ Harvey, whose name I'll mention here in a second. Ollie Gordon is nowhere to be found behind an Oklahoma State offensive line that's can't run block to save its life. Loaded boxes or not, because apparently you can run on loaded boxes. See Ashton Genty, Boise State, and every other running back. But it's become quite an interesting situation. We talked about RJ Harvey before the season. We talked about Ollie Gordon. And yet I propose to you the four contenders at this point. We talked about Cam. Taj Brooks, the most forgotten about running back in the Big 12, leads the Big 12 in yards per game. Now, he's only played in 5 games. He did miss one. Is third in touchdowns. DJ Giddens leads the Big 12 in yards and is second in yards per attempt at 7.3. That is like second behind Corey Kiner, who hasn't had nearly as many runs as the top running backs in the conference. RJ Harvey leads the conference in touchdowns. Like, I think this is a conversation between those 4 running backs: Scadabo, Brooks, Giddens, and Harvey. We can make conversations about other good running backs in the Big 12. This isn't saying that there aren't other good running backs in the Big 12. But at this point, I have a hard time saying that anyone else should be legitimately considered. Utah fans are going to say Micah Bernard, cool. Andy, you might say Devin Neal for Kansas. I get it. Corey Connor's done a good job. There's the 3-headed monster at West Virginia, but the problem is that they all take from each other. At this point, to me, it's Taj Brooks, DJ Giddens, Cam Scadabo, and RJ Harvey. And if I have to pick one, man, it's tough. Because I think to me it comes down to Scadabo or Brooks. And I know that Kansas State fans are going to get mad, and Scott's going to text me tomorrow about DJ Giddens and how wrong I am, and that's fine. This isn't Giddens. I know this podcast now has a reputation, thanks, Andy. But like, I think it's Scatabo or Brooks. Brooks gets the least amount of credit, in part because he missed a game, and Scatabo, I think, gets less credit because he plays for a team that nobody had any expectations.
Yeah,
for.
I mean, I would say Giddens is the leader in terms of overall number of yards, but it's only by 13, right? He only has 13 more than Scatabo. Scatabo has 6 more touchdowns. Like, I feel like touchdowns are important enough. And yes, you can point to the fact that Scatabo has 133 carries to 108 for Giddens, but there is something to be said about a running back who, like DJ Giddens and you know, Devin Neal and like other running backs of that style that rack up a ton of yards on gigantic runs. Scatabo is consistent though. Like, he definitely has some of his gigantic runs, but he is also consistently getting in tough yards, getting, you know, finishing plays, getting to the end zone. I don't know. I just been extremely impressed by what Scatabo has done. He also, like, you look at it, he does not really have another consistent running threat on his team. You know, this is much more like the Oklahoma State situation where we expected Ollie Gordon to be so good that it didn't really matter that you know, Oklahoma State didn't have another guy that could consistently run. That obviously has made made a problem for Oklahoma State, but Arizona State, he's thriving in that role. And so I do think you have to give him a little bit of extra credit for that. For me, I think if I'm looking at Big 12 running back of the year right now, it's Scatabo for me.
For me, it's got to be hands down Taj Brooks. At the very beginning, I had the conference championship game being between Utah and Texas Tech. Texas Tech's wins have been messy and not pretty looking, so they're not really getting the credit that they deserve despite only having one loss. But once again, I think a lot of that is due to Taj Brooks and their quarterback, who ultimately, if they get the wins, does it even matter, right? If they get the wins and they still make the championship, I mean, they're still my pick to sneak into the championship, as rough as that path may look, and it's largely due to Taj Brooks.
We knew it was going to be an interesting race for Big 12 RB1 heading into the season. We said this was the year of the running back. I think that still holds true. It's
different
just
running
very
backs.
different than we expected. Like, DJ Giddens isn't shocking. Taj Brooks isn't shocking. We thought those two would be up there. RJ Harvey's still solid, but like, he's 4th on this list. I do think Micah Bernard has been solid for Utah. He has been. It's just that you've got to throw in Scatabo into this argument, and
yeah, I mean,
that's the one where you're just like,
I wouldn't be surprised if Ollie Gordon figures something out,
and I love it,
you know, in the second half and makes a huge run at potentially getting better. Like, I'm not going to count on it, but I wouldn't be shocked by it. Same as, you know, Kansas, Devin Neal, if they actually start using him the way that they should be using him, I could imagine he starts jumping up the rankings in terms of the total number of yards. But, you know, the fact that those two running backs are not getting the results that you expect isn't something that you can kind of, you know, like project out and say, oh, well, they're obviously going to get better. We're obviously going to regress to the mean. I think at this point, yeah, there's so many guys that have been so good that I don't think it's that we didn't expect these guys to be good. It's that we were expecting other guys to be better that have not been able to be better. So, I mean, like Scatabo, I think a lot of people like myself thought Arizona State's going to have plenty of problems across their entire offense. As good as Scatabo looks coming into the year, it was hard to project out anything for him because you expected the rest of the team to kind of drag down his performances. Well, Arizona State's been electric this year, and Scatabo has been a large reason why, but the rest of the team has really helped as well. So it's that kind of sweet spot of having a team that is good enough overall to be super competitive, but have a standout player who is very clearly the guy that makes that offense run.
Yeah, Andy, I agree with you in that sense. And when you said that it's not that we didn't think these guys were going to be good, but we thought other guys would be better. And I agree with that. I mean, I really thought the top 3 would be Taj Brooks, Devin Neal, Ollie Gordon, and obviously Oklahoma State and Kansas, nowhere to be found. So that leaves Taj Brooks. And the other guys are just kind of ones that have come up as a surprise because those two aren't in the spotlight like we thought they would be.
One thing that is never unexpected is how happy you're going to be wearing something from Charlie Hustle. sponsors here of the 1012 podcast and the 1012 network as a whole. They have incredible gear, both in design and in comfort, for every Big 12 fan. All 16 teams covered and then some, from great t-shirts, super comfortable hoodies, and sweaters. Long sleeve t-shirts that are great. They keep throwing out good stuff left, right, sideways. Okay, now look, they've got a lot of Kansas City stuff going on right now. Obviously, the Chiefs are in action. The Royals were in the playoff. Not the Royals. I don't know.
They were.
The baseball. Yeah,
they're not anymore.
Okay, that's fine. I don't know. So maybe you're a Royals fan who's sad and you need some Royals gear to help dry the tears. Maybe you're a Chiefs fan, Andy, who needs some new Chiefs gear. Maybe you're a BYU fan or an Iowa State fan or an Arizona State fan. You just want to celebrate how good your team is. You want to wear gear all the time because you want everyone to be like, your team's good, and you get to go, yeah, they are. I feel great because that is my testosterone boost. Not testosterone. What's the drug that produces?
Dopamine.
Thank you.
Dopamine.
If football winning gets your testosterone rolling, that's also a positive, okay? It's not going to hurt. So go to charliehustle.com, get your dopamine or testosterone hit with promo code 101215, TEN1215 for 15% off all non-sale items. I'm not kidding. Incredibly comfortable, super cool stuff. You're going to love it. People who see you in it are going to love it. They're going to want to know where you got it from. Buy some for you. Buy some for family and friends. Buy some from a random fan that you just made friends with when you were randomly hugging and cheering and jumping up and down because your team just got a massive upset this weekend. I don't know what you're going to do, but do it in Charlie Hustle. CharlieHustle.com, 10-12-15, 15% off all non-sale items. Charlie Hustle, vintage made fresh.
Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
I feel like we need one of those radio disclaimers really fast that says something to the effect of, wearing Charlie Hustle will not change your testosterone levels, nor is it an ED treatment. And Robert, as you're listening to this, I fully expect you to start at the hashtag and get it trending of not an ED treatment with Charlie Hustle. So,
look, if the podcast alone doesn't do it for you, I don't know if a t-shirt will. Okay, BYU 41, Arizona 19. BYU is 6-0 for the sixth time in program history. They're the first Big 12 team to reach bowl eligibility. They knocked off Arizona in front of the biggest crowd in Provo since 2009. The vibes are high in Provo. The hype train is rolling. Shout out Hype Train Podcast, our BYU show. They said that they've got a special guest for this week's episode, so you're going to want to tune in for that, and they're doing a fantastic job. I mean, this is a team. Every year we've got a team that everyone picks super low and then turns out to be awesome. This year we've got two. Obviously Arizona State, but BYU has been fantastic. The defense is good. They did the same thing to Fafita as they did to Avery Johnson. Just give us a pick. 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 It's been so good. And look, I get it. They are the third luckiest team in college football. That's the stat. Parker Fleming has talked about them. There's some stuff that doesn't quite line up. They've had things roll their way, but this is the Big 12 conference. Luck actually matters in this conference because it can get you a lot of wins. How do you do in close games? Is your defense forcing turnovers? Are you making big plays at key moments? Are you making BYU is doing all of that. Jake Retzloff has been way better than expected, and especially at home. I pulled up the stats. On the road, 7 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, 57% completion rate, 711 yards through the air. At home, 7 touchdowns, no interceptions, almost a 64% completion rate, 715 yards. BYU, he has been better than expected. The defense has been awesome. They've been doing all this with massive issues at running back. That's where they're all injured. The BYU running back room can join the we're so injured feel better meetings with Iowa State's linebackers and Kansas State's defensive backs. Okay, everyone get together and kumbaya, and hopefully good things will happen. And for BYU moving forward, like They've played 3 games at home and 3 games on the road. The schedule is nice moving forward. Like, the schedule is setting up for them. Yeah, they've got 3 more road games. Yeah, they've got to go on the road to play Utah. I get all that stuff. BYU setting this team, when you watch them and see what they are doing, turnovers are hard to predict, but some teams are just good at it. It's not something you can necessarily coach up to be consistent at. If we could, everyone would do it. But there are just teams who are good at forcing turnovers. There are just teams who are better at home. This is just another great vibes team, and it's a team that continues to be really good. And as for Arizona, Noah Fifita didn't come back for this, but this is what he's got. He's got T-Mac and no one else. And they don't look all that well coached. And Noah Fifita, when he's playing within the offense, looks good. And when he's trying to improv, which he did great doing last year, doesn't look as good this year. This is just not a good Arizona. This Arizona team's just not very good. They can't run the ball that well, but they're just not very good. It's T-Mac, it's Fifita, and that's the offense.
Yeah, Arizona, I think, is, showing the signs that we usually see from a team that has a brand new coach, where
and
things
a ton
are
of
different.
new
well, yeah, I mean,
roster,
yeah,
there's
but
roster,
but I think that's kind of the main thing, right? It's like there's so much that's different that those of us that expected that one change or that one constant to really kind of help push them to where they needed to be forgot to account for that. And I do think that, I don't think any of us, at least as far as I know, expected Arizona to win the Big 12 conference. But I do think we expected them to be better than this. And I mean, they still have time to get it turned around. They still have some good things, but there's enough holes in this team that you kind of have to wonder. BYU, on the other hand, the story of this team is the defense. I think that defense is really what is pushing this team to where it needs to be, because, you were worried coming into the year, those that wanted to pick against BYU were like, well, hey, they don't really have a running game. And honestly, you look at where they are, rushing, they're not particularly good in the Big 12 at rushing the ball compared to a lot of the other teams. So, and you look at the passing game, it's not like they're, lights out passing like crazy. The offense is good. It's decent, but it's definitely been the defense that has really pushed this team to where it is.
Yeah. And I really, really, really wish that we could get an Iowa State BYU game. Obviously, if it'll happen, it'll be in the championship.
You can. It just has to be in Arlington.
It's got to be the championship, which I'm not sure I want them both in the championship, but I wish they had a head-to-head meeting before that. I'm curious because they've played different people, so I don't know what to make and who to necessarily think is better than the other at this point in time. Time will tell. As far as Arizona, I thought they'd be better than they are. I didn't expect them to win the conference, but I thought they'd be better than they were. Last week they had the cacti corral with Texas Tech overusing the cactus emoji, which I kind of counted them out early, and they started to come back, and I fell asleep. And I was really glad when I woke up in the middle of the night to see that Texas Tech had pulled it out and beat them. But they're kind of where I thought they'd be. Decent, but once again, not top caliber.
All right. At this point, we are very excited to welcome into the show the voice of BYU, Greg Wrubell. Greg, welcome to the show, man. It's a pleasure to have you back on.
To be back. Sorry for the delay there, folks.
No. Hey, no problem at all. Greg, I wanted to get you on because we got to talk about this BYU team. One of the 2 best stories in the conference this season, 2 of the most unexpected starts in the conference with Arizona State. As Andy kind of mentioned, this is a team where it really feels like they've been doing it with defense. Jake Retzlaff, I've read off the stats of home versus road. We know about the running back injuries where they just haven't been able to stay healthy there when LJ Martin plays. We know that he's a big part of this offense. But, what is it about this BYU team how are they 6-0? How is this team able to be in the spot that they are in right now with a ceiling that just seems like it keeps getting higher?
First and foremost, they did one of the things that's harder to do nowadays in the NIL transfer portal era, and that is return a lot of what they had last year. And it wasn't a disaster of a season last year by any stretch. Yeah, it was a bowl-less season. They were 5-7, but they were 5-2 at one point. And had that 5-game losing streak to end the season. And they ended the year with games against Oklahoma and Oklahoma State that they could have won either or both. Had they, 5-7, 7-5, or 6-6, you're playing in a postseason, and there's not maybe the same dire feeling about this year's team, but they didn't win those games, and so it looked like, well, BYU's, getting its comeuppance in power conference football. But there was a better core there than I think people maybe recognized, and they brought pretty much everybody back. Yes, they did bring in Gary Bohannon to compete with Jake Retzlaff for the starting quarterback job, but pretty much the rest of the team, and let's not ignore Jack Kelly's influence at linebacker as a Weber State transfer, but for the most part, most of the guys who are around for 5-7 are the same guys around for 6-0. And I think these days you see less and less of being able to bring a team back, especially a team that doesn't go to a postseason. A lot of coaches overreact and say, well, we got to blow a couple things up here and really go find the infusion of talent. Well, BYU didn't approach that. Yes, they changed O-line coaches. They changed tight end coaches, and those have been impactful moves. But for the most part, long answer to your question is that last year's team is a lot of this year's team. And Jake Retzlaff got better. He needed to beat out Gary Bohannon. They brought in a guy with 34 power conference starts and a Big 12 title and a Sugar Bowl win, and all those things. He'd been around. And when he was good a couple of years ago and before he was really good, they brought him in. Could he have been the guy? Absolutely. Unless Jake beats him out. And that's what he had to do, and he's done that. And so I think a lot of things come together. But as much as anything, Jay Hill's second year as defensive coordinator is bearing fruit as well. It's a scheme that took a little while to adopt and kind of really embrace, but it's been done, and I think you're seeing the results in the stats right now. So a few things coming into play, and then there's the ever-present chip on the shoulder that people talk about, right? It's a huge cliche, but it kind of plays with this year's team. BYU expects to go to bowl games. When they didn't last year, it stung, and they took it to heart. They took the 13th place pick in the preseason poll to heart. They took the Vegas 4.5 wins over under to heart. Whatever they can grab and latch onto for motivation, they're doing so, and effectively so far.
What has impressed you the most? Because bringing everybody back, I mean, Oklahoma State brought everybody back, right? We teams bringing back players can be a good thing. And sometimes, what is it? The returning production is only as good as returning production is. And obviously, as you mentioned, Retzlaff has made a big improvement. But what is it about this team that you feel like has impressed you the most so far this season to be able to turn what was last year into this year?
Well, I'll go back to they weren't that far away last year. And so it wasn't like they were having to start from scratch. Again, if you go back and watch those Oklahoma State games, really winnable. I mean, they're up 18 at halftime in Stillwater. And didn't finish that one out. They could have been very easily playing in the postseason. Had BYU been a bowl team in their first year of the Big 12, they're probably not picked 13th in year 2 of the Big 12. So we start with the fact that the ingredients were there. I do think the O-line coaching change has been a big deal. I think the O-line play as a result has been improved. But again, we're calling a lot of the same numbers we did last year. But there's something about getting a year older and a year better and a year more cohesive with the group you were with. I think it's really more of that than almost anything. When Jake Retzlaff became the starter last year, and then that was a Keaton Slovis injury that put Jake into the mix, a lot of things were kind of not happening well around him. It was tough for Jake to look that good. But this was a JUCO guy coming in and getting his first FBS reps at the power conference level. There was a lot going on with him. And the decisions were always the best, but he found a way to kind of grind through it. I go back to kind of a microcosm of who Jake is. That Oklahoma game. BYU's kind of in control in that game and about to put a score on the board that might, if not be the death knell for the Sooners, really put them on their back heel. And from the 2-yard line, Jake throws a pick six that goes the other way 100 yards. And Jake chases that dude down the entire length of the field, slaps his ankles at the opposite goal line. He made a 100-yard sprint to try and tackle that guy. at the goal line, essentially, doesn't make the play. The score happens. The game kind of turns on that play. Just a drastic change of fortune on that one play. But Jake runs to make that play. He's flat on his back. He's exhausted, pops up, runs over to the sideline. Well, because it was a pick six, his offense is back on the field like 30 seconds later. He barely has a breath to give at that point when he gets back on the field and leads his team to a touchdown drive to answer that play. That's who he is. That's who he is. And he's gotten better off of that kind of ingrained, element of that character. The other stuff has happened around him. He was a prolific JUCO passer. The ability is there. And now he's just kind of showing it that he's, gotten better, making better decisions, and is simply a better player a year later.
Running back has been a spot where BYU's been dealing with injuries this season. How are they kind of dealing with that this year? And do you see a situation where as they get healthier, it's just going to make the offense better?
Yeah, they've been cobbling together the rushing numbers right now because they've had to use literally 6 different running backs. Jake Retzloff, was the best thing BYU had going in the run game because of the injuries to the running backs. LJ Martin and Hinckley Ropati were the 2 best guys. LJ's kind of the workhorse guy, but in the SMU game, both guys go out and they're not seen for the next month. And it was during that month that all these other lesser known running backs did what they could. And they also had to deal with injuries. Sione Aimoa hasn't played the last couple of games, and he was kind of the revelation in the Kansas State game. So, week to week, it's been someone else having to get it done until this past week when LJ Martin and Hinckley Ropati both returned, and the run game, not surprisingly, maybe looked its healthiest. I think having LJ and Hinckley back will make a big difference for BYU. Jake won't have to be the leading ground gainer as he had been through 5 games. But Jake is still a really good dual threat. He really is a guy that can hurt you both ways and does just enough each week to keep teams truly honest and be productive with his legs. But missing LJ for a month and missing Hinckley Ropati for a month was tough. The fact that BYU stayed undefeated without those 2 guys, and while losing a right guard once and twice, and losing a starting center as well, they were rotating around on the offensive line as well. This has not been the most cohesive group offensively between the O-line and the backfield. So to stay 6-0, to be playing the way they're playing, huge kudos to those guys and to their coaches to have them ready to go, because that's not typically how you do it and still play really good football.
Hey, it's Austin James. If you're like me, trying to live your best life while living with diabetes, you can relate to worrying if you're doing a good job managing your diabetes. I use the Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor to get real-time glucose readings and see the impact of every meal and activity to make better decisions. The Freestyle Libre 3 Plus sensor can help me live life with diabetes on my own terms, and it gives me more time for the things I love, like being a dad and a musician. Now this is progress. Learn more at freestylelibre.us.
For prescription only. Safety info found at freestylelibre.us.
We've mentioned this on the show a couple times now. TeamRankings.com tracks luck rankings. They try and track who are the luckiest teams through a number of different things. And look, this is the Big 12 Conference where you have to be able to win your 1-score games. You have to be able to have the ball bounce your way. You have to be at peak levels of development cycle. Like, it's just because there's not as much that separates the teams in this conference. You got to have some things go your way. Right now, BYU, according to TeamRankings.com, the 3rd luckiest team in college football. Now, I understand how some people view the word luck. I view it as preparation meets opportunity. Luck is not a bad word. It's not a bad thing. It's not taking away credit from what you've achieved. It's you being able to take advantage of situations when they happen. How do you view the notion that BYU has been a lucky team this year?
I will totally counter that with the fact that BYU is the best team against the spread in college football. They should not be 6-0. Okay, they are beating the spread every week and by a considerable margin. They've been crushing the spread. So that says they're not lucky. That says they're actually good, because Vegas says they shouldn't be 6-0. And Vegas says they're probably a 3-3 team. Well, I don't think you get to 6-0. And I know I love the luck computation, because people they freak out when they hear the word luck. Like, it's not about, because Ken Pom has, the luck rating, but it's a metric. It's not truly quote unquote luck. It's based on metrics. But BYU hasn't been lucky to get to 6-0. To the contrary, they've beaten teams they're not supposed to beat. When they went to Baylor, Even though Baylor's not having its best year, and you could argue they're in a bit of a dip as a program, that was still going to be a tough game for BYU, and they were underdogs. They were underdogs at SMU. SMU was on a 9-game home win streak, and in those 9 games, they were averaging 54 points a game. They didn't score a touchdown against BYU. You don't luck your way into keeping SMU out of the end zone. And I think most rankers realize BYU's good at this point. They kept K-State out of the end zone. You don't do that, and with luck. And so there's been a lot going against BYU. Again, they've had to beat the spread 6 straight weeks, and they've done it. So yeah, I think they're exceeding expectations, not just kind of skating by.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, right? In this case, luck is a metric, right? In terms of like these are situations that typically could go one way or another, and we have seen multiple teams in the past in the Big 12 that have been really, really good because they have been able to be good in those situations. It gets quantified as luck, but I think it's more of a being good in those clutch situations that could go either way based off of what we know about the sport. What is it about this BYU team that allows them to take advantage of those opportunities so often?
Yeah, great point. And on that point, they're it's not that BYU, as enthused as I am about BYU being 6-0 and crushing the spread and all that. Yeah, there are a couple of red flags still out there. The third down number is not great. The third down number's probably got to come up, I think, by the end of the season for them to have the best chance to keep winning football games. There's some things there that need to improve. The run game's been good enough, but not overwhelming at this point. There are some things they need to tidy up. There's no doubt about that. So they're not without flaws, and those things have to be addressed. But I think it's 4 non-offensive touchdowns now at this point. These are the kinds of things. These are the kinds of things that might turn the game and maybe might lead people to believe, well, BYU kind of got by because they didn't score an offensive touchdown, but they scored a fumble return touchdown or a pick six or a kickoff return touchdown, et cetera, which they've done. And they're doing that seemingly almost every week at this point. And so they are incredibly opportunistic. They're incredibly complimentary. It's kind of all happening at every end. I mean, the special teams do have a punt return touchdown, a kickoff return touchdown, a 70-yard punt, an executed fake punt at Baylor. They're doing the things that you want to do to change games in the special teams. The defense numbers stand for themselves. I mean, BYU, as of today, is the best pass defense in the country. Number 1, team pass efficiency defense. This is 6 games in, so you've got a half a season to work with. You can't really game the numbers through 6 games. The schedule strength is good. To be the number 1 team pass efficiency defense, normally you might think the teams doing that are the SEC juggernauts that recruit whoever they want to in their secondary. Well, that's not necessarily typical, let's say BYU would say in the past, yet there's that secondary working with that front 7 in such a way that, yeah, it's the toughest group to pass against right now in the country. Noah Fafita, pretty good quarterback for Arizona, had his first sub-100 pass efficiency game of his career last night. Worst game of his career against BYU. Not coincidentally now, BYU's turning people or really good players into average players. And so I think they are making the key plays at the right times that don't always show up as, are they a 500-yard passing team or 400-yard passing team? Maybe not. But they're going to pass for 250, run for 150, and turn the game around with some sudden change takeaways. That's kind of who they are right now. And that's a good football team, too.
All right, we're going to save our conversation in regards to Arlington for next week because I don't want this episode to go too long. However, before I do, Greg, I'll go ahead and get your thought since you're here, and I am intrigued. I mean, look, BYU sitting there, 3-0 in conference standings, undefeated. They don't have Iowa State on the schedule. You've already beaten Kansas State. The schedule moving forward is, I'm not going to say it's totally friendly, but it's not too daunting. Houston and Kansas on the schedule, Oklahoma State, UCF.
At Utah is decidedly unfriendly.
At Utah and I would even throw in at Arizona State, the other Big 12 team of destiny. Absolutely. Is not the friendliest 2 games. But outside of that, OSU at UCF, Kansas, and Houston, it is a manageable schedule. I'm going to put you on the spot here, Greg, because it's fun to do it. What is your percentage chance you think that BYU is competing for a Big 12 championship in Arlington come December?
There is a 100% chance I'm going to duck that question. Because
I love it.
That's great.
They're 3 games into a 9-game conference schedule right now, and we've already seen the games we thought would be the hardest games may not be, and the games we thought might be the softer games are turning out to not look like that. So I just don't know where to go with this yet. I just think it's way too early for me, and I know it's a fun thing to project and prognosticate, and I'd love to say that BYU's got a path to Arlington as good as anyone else's, but we see today, just to bring up an example, I think someone did a breakdown of the Big Ten teams that are having to go 2 time zones for games right now, cross country, and I think those teams are 3-10 or 3-11 in the league right now. BYU's got that cross country trip coming up here in 2 weeks to Orlando, and well, UCF's now 3-3. They're losing games that you didn't think they'd lose. Well, that's maybe well, I still think that's still always going to be a tough game for BYU to go play, is to cross over to the East Coast and get that done. I think it helps BYU that a lot of these guys were kind of born of the independence era, and they've done a lot of these cross country trips, because when you're an independent, you're everywhere all the time. So they've done a lot of this, but I still think, I just bring up UCF as an example. Looks like a softer game right now, but is it really when you're coming from the Mountain Time Zone to the East Coast? So I look at that as clearly a landmine. Oklahoma State, BYU's never beaten Oklahoma State. And I know there's a history involved here. It goes back decades. They've only played 3 times, but the fact remains, never beaten the program. And they had a game in hand. They lost to those guys last year in a rainy, soggy Stillwater when who could get anything done? Well, Alan Bowman looked pretty dang good in the second half, coming back from down 18 to lead the Cowboys to victory over BYU in overtime. Different team, different season. Bowman's maybe on the bench now. Point being, there are some things that you can't take for granted against even Oklahoma State. And then, okay, it's a bye week, and then it's Utah. Well, Utah's its own totally animal. Even if Utah loses the rest of the way till the BYU game, you do not know what's going to happen in that game. You have no clue. I've seen the craziest stuff happen in that game over decades now. So I can't even begin to think about forecasting the Utah game. And then the season ender against Arizona State, well, that looked to be softer earlier. It's not now. So I just can't say that BYU's, in any better spot than the team that's in 3rd or 5th or 7th right now in the Big 12. I really just want to see a few more things play out. I'm excited. I'm happy. It's a great job to have when your team is 6-0 and you're selling out stadiums, and it's a beautiful time to be a Cougar right now. There's no doubt about it. But this team, it just has to keep the pedal down, and they're really kind of gravitating toward the notion of each week is this is this week's statement. The next week will be next week's statement, and we're not going to be talking about the Utah game and its importance in mid-October. We're not going to be thinking about Arlington in mid-October. We have the Oklahoma State statement to make next. I will say that playing at night at LaVell Edwards Stadium is a competitive advantage. The daytime game was a pretty good advantage too, but it's different at night. This will be an 8:15 kick Friday, which is 9:15 Stillwater time. And as gorgeous as it's been here in Utah, we were 78 degrees today. We were 75 yesterday. The forecast is for 40s, low 40s on Friday night. The weather turns Thursday here, and we've had gorgeous weather for weeks and months and nothing cold. And I think Thursday, cold front comes in, it gets wet, and it could feel like Stillwater in November on Friday night when the Cowboys come to play. So it might be a different feel altogether. But Friday night, Saturday nights at LaVell Edwards Stadium, late night games, something about the vibe in that building. And I've seen so many games in the last 5-6 years where teams are backed up in that student end of the stadium, and the false starts happen, and the procedures happen, and the mistakes happen, the fumbles, the strips, the picks. They're all happening at this one end of the stadium where those students are roaring and kind of pulsating at you. We saw it again yesterday, even in the daytime against Arizona. It's a really unique phenomenon. And so I think Oklahoma State's got to deal with that on Friday night, despite the fact that they're also looking at maybe a quarterback change and the losing streak. It's a fascinating setup, but I take nothing for granted at this point, even at 6-0.
And Phillip,
Provo at night is a real thing.
I promise to keep it short, but can I just add, Greg, this is why I love BYU. This is why I love BYU fans, because we have some teams out here with 2 losses acting like they're going to the championship game for sure. They're going in the national championship for sure. Utah, Utah. And then we have BYU, who has every reason to be conceited, but they're not. They're humble. They still think that there's a chance, even despite being 6-0, that they may not make the championship game. So you know what? I hope you guys beat Utah. I hope you guys make the championship game. You guys deserve it.
Well, it would be, I mean, you know, I dream, right? I dream about a conference championship game. How great would that be? I mean, second year in the Big 12. I mean, what an amazing thing that would be. But it is just year 2 of power conference football. And I think for a lot of programs, if you just drop them into P5 or P4 football, it takes a while to get that flywheel going. And we saw last year, you know, playing 10 straight weeks of power conference opponents, it kind of ground BYU down after a bit. They learned a lot from last year. Again, they were 3-0. They were 5-2. They were 1 win away from a bowl game last year, and they never found that 6th win. That, you know, I think introduced a lot of humility into the equation as well, because they never got there. They never got that last win. Well, that part's put to bed. Bowl eligibility has been secured already. They know they're playing in the postseason somewhere, and somewhere probably pretty cool. Big 12's got some pretty nice bowl tie-ins. So that's kind of put to bed and assured, and a nice thing to have in the back pocket. But clearly they're thinking higher and thinking better. But they are a truly week-to-week team. I will make one note about what you just said about the humility and there's a real strong, and this could be cliche too with teams and coaches, but I think Kalani's being real with me when he says, you know, we leave the room a lot and let these guys go to work and solve problems and organize things on their own and take care of things on their own. We're not talking about, you know, quote unquote player only meetings that happen when there's upheaval. They do a lot of things without the coaches, tactically, strategically, emotionally, motivationally. It's a really player-driven group, and they're saying it's a big difference. Not that last year's team was bad that way, but this year's team is so much different that way, and that really gives the players, the coaches, confidence about what kind of group they're dealing with, and that's something that I think is a unique aspect about this year's team as well. Everyone talks about the maturity of BYU teams just because of, you know, so many guys have been on church missions and they're generally older, but it, you know, maturity, I don't know. It shows up in different ways. And last year's team was probably pretty old too and went 5-7. So it shows up in different ways. This year's way it's showing up is in how they organize and lead on their own without the coaches having to kind of prod and push and be in front of every team room.
I will note Bill Connolly's SP+. Iowa State leads the Big 12 in Big 12 title game odds at 31.6%, then BYU at 22.5%, Kansas State at 18.4%, Texas Tech at 8.4%, and then everyone else is under 4%.
What was BYU's number again?
So 22.5%, number 2 in the conference. Okay. So sitting in a good spot, obviously at 6-0, 3-0 in conference play, sitting in a very good spot.
I will admit.
All right.
I will admit too. Sorry to cut you there, Phil. I have not yet opened up the tiebreaker rules yet on the Big 12 website.
They're at least understandable this year. Last year was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and maybe if they get to 7-0, I'll open the tab and see what the tiebreakers really are. Because it might come into play at some point. Again, not having Iowa State on the schedule could make things interesting. I don't know how it all shakes out, but a lot of football left to come, and I don't know that anyone gets to Arlington without a loss. It just feels like this Big 12, it has just that much uncertainty week to week. But yeah, the teams at the top have looked worthy of their positioning, no doubt.
All right, let's wrap this show up the same way we do every week. We are going to look at this week's schedule. Everyone gets to pick the one game that they are absolutely going to keep an eye on. Of course, you cannot pick your team. That makes this a lot more interesting. I will run through the schedule for this weekend. Friday night, 9:15, as Greg has mentioned. Of course, we mentioned all times in God's time. BYU hosting Oklahoma State in Provo at night. Good luck, Cowboys. On Saturday, we kick things off at 11 with one morning game. Cincinnati hosting Arizona State at 11 a.m. on ESPN+. 2:30 on ESPN+. Kansas hosting Houston in Kansas City at Arrowhead Stadium. 3 o'clock on Fox. Arizona hosting Colorado in Tucson. Also at 3 o'clock on ESPN2, Texas Tech hosting Baylor in the Butt Bowl. 6:30 p.m. on FS1, Iowa State hosting UCF in Ames. 6:30 p.m. West Virginia, another night game on a major network. This time they're hosting Kansas State. Can they pull off the upset this week in Morgantown? And then our nightcap, as we get one every single week, Utah hosting TCU at 9:30 p.m. on ESPN Plus, or on ESPN, pardon me, in Salt Lake. Greg, as our guest, I will ask you, obviously you can't pick BYU Oklahoma State. What is the other game in the Big 12 this weekend that you are absolutely keeping an eye on?
Right. TCU Utah is intriguing to me. I think this may be Utah's last stand in a way to hang in the race. And of course I've got a vested interest in how Utah is playing once you get to the turn of October into November. So I think for me that's going to be the one. TCU's been disappointing, I think you could argue. Most people would say that's been a disappointing team this year. But maybe I've got too much PTSD or PTECUSD, I guess you could call it. I've seen TCU do too many bad things to BYU over the years to think they're ever too down. And so if they are a team that can still put something together, they can prove it in Salt Lake City. And again, Utah's in a really tenuous spot right now. With another week, is Cam Rising that much better? Or is it another week to put the kid back in and give him a week of reps and make a change that no one saw coming that way? There's a lot going on in that game. I think it's intriguing to me. They're so close. It's kind of a personal thing, knowing how close they are. But I'll go with that one for me.
Brittany?
Well, as we've already addressed, I've gone to 4 of these schools, so picking one that's not my team is next to impossible. So I'm just going to pick one. I gotta go with the Texas Tech Baylor game in the Butt Bowl for 2 reasons. One, I don't think Baylor is that good this year, but Texas Tech, once again, hasn't been so pretty to watch. I think they're underrated though still, so I want to see them win. Second reason, my dog Waffles, for those who follow Waffles, who's a Texas Tech fan, he picked Texas Tech to cheer for in the Butt Bowl last year with tennis balls, so it's kind of like a little anniversary thing. So I've got to stay up and watch it for him.
Good choice. Andy?
Look, the Butt Bowl is always a good choice just because it's the Butt Bowl. But no, for me, the one that really jumps out would be Kansas State, West Virginia. This is Kansas State trying to keep up with both Iowa State and BYU in the Big 12 race. West Virginia is trying to kind of get back to where they think that they can be. And I mean, this is a huge game for them, right? Like, if you really feel like Neil Brown has turned the corner in West Virginia, they had to have either this game or, the Iowa State game. They didn't get Iowa State. They have to have Kansas State. I think for people to really feel like this is a program that is on the rise and is going to be able to compete in the Big 12 in the next few years. So I do agree that TCU Utah one is pretty intriguing. Seeing if Utah can allow Josh Hoover, who struggled against Houston, after going crazy on the Jayhawks, if they can't stop him, makes you wonder if that's I think that's the evidence we need about whether they are a really good defense this year or not. So there's a lot of storylines all over the place, but the one that jumps out to me is definitely Kansas State, West Virginia.
Yeah, Andy, I agree on that one. It's 2-2-1 teams. West Virginia getting back-to-back late night marquee games. Iowa State last week, Kansas State this week. Can they get this one? I mean, they really weren't that close against Iowa State. It was close early, and then it was all Iowa State pretty much the rest of the game. Do they have a better shot here? Is Kansas State's secondary still really, really beat up? Is that something Garrett Green can actually take advantage of, or is it still going to be a West Virginia's team that struggles to run the ball against a good defensive line? I don't know. Butt Bowl is always fun. I think Arizona State Cincinnati is intriguing at 11 o'clock. I kind of hate that that's on ESPN Plus because Arizona State, the other fun story here in the Big 12, 5-1 overall, 2-1 in conference play. Cincinnati looks like a competent team. That's going to be I think it's a tough game for Arizona State on the road. Also, the fact that Arizona State Cincinnati is a conference game in the Big 12 is just another example of realignment is as weird as can be, folks. And then look, from a game standpoint, UCF Iowa State, like Iowa State should blow UCF out. Like it's just the UCF's in a tailspin. But reminder, these are two of the most online fan bases who have gone at it ever since UCF was announced they were joining the conference. And we finally get a football game between these two teams. Reminder, UCF actually put Cyclone Larry in like official UCF, like social media content. So I'm at least going to keep an eye on it. Online, maybe not the actual game. I may not turn the game on because I'll be watching West Virginia, Kansas State, but I'm at least going to be on my phone, like paying attention, hopping in the Wide Right Now Tonight Discord to see what they have to say. So as always, it is a fun weekend of college football in the Big 12. Thank you everyone for tuned in today for the show. Of course, we'll be back on Thursday to make picks for all the games, the full slate, and a guest I won't name because of course, if I do, they won't show up. But Brittany, do me a favor for everybody who wants to know more about waffles and all 4 Big 12 schools that you have spent at least a semester at, where can they do so?
My Twitter is at It's Brittany Rose, and then Waffles Twitter is at Waffles Reckham.
Very good. Andy, of course, at AndyMits12, host of the Rock Chalk podcast. Go check it out for all of your Kansas sports, Kansas athletics, news and information. And Greg, sir, thank you so much. Really appreciated having you on. It's great to get some insight into this BYU team who is, seriously, like, this is one of the best and most interesting and fun stories this year in college football, and it's getting overshadowed by just how chaotic this entire season is. And so I appreciate you hopping on and giving us some more insight into just a fun team to watch.
It has been, and I appreciate the invitation. Again, forgive me for being a late jumping on tonight. I apologize for that, but I'm glad we got to spend this time together, and ask anytime. I'll be on time next time, I promise. And we hope this BYU story continues a little while longer for us, at least in this part. It's been a blast.
BYU Iowa State playing a conference championship game in Arlington just is the most Big 12 thing I could possibly think of. Just the only thing better would be like Cincinnati, West Virginia. Like, sure, let's pull those two teams all the way to Texas. But later, say a team from Utah and a team from Iowa playing a conference championship game in Texas is just took it right into my veins. All right, everybody, enjoy your week. We'll be back to make picks on Thursday. We'll talk to y'all again then.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.